Hey, yo, say hello to the bad guy, Scott Hall.
This is Hall of Famer Ron Simmons.
This is Johnny B. Bad.
This is a total package. Lex Luger.
Larry Zabisco.
This is Sully Blanchard.
Hey, everybody, it's Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. And if you want your money's worth, then you got to stay right here with WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum.
Okay, we're back. Hey there, all you savages. Welcome back to Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum. And welcome to WrestleMania weekend. It's going to be a wild and crazy one. We have the king of wrestling, Harley Race. He's with us this week. Scum, it's going to be a wild and crazy one. What's going on today, my brother?
It is going to be a wild and crazy one. It's nice to be back with Harley Race and you, my longtime tag team partner, here on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. What a fantastic show we have lined up for the listeners here. You want to talk the glory days of professional wrestling. You want to talk an 8-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a WWE Hall of Famer, kind of like a old Flair interview from the Monday Nitro era, a guy who's gone and mixed it up with the Briscoes, the Funks, the Brodies, the you name it. Harley Race has been in there with him and danced and put on a great show. I really can't wait to get into talking with Harley here today. And kind of ironic and fitting that on the day of the granddaddy of them all, WrestleMania, we'd have what many would consider the granddaddy of all-time competitors, Mr. Race.
Yeah, totally. I look forward to his interview, and I look forward to a great night of WrestleMania. Of course, while you guys are listening to this, WrestleMania is going on now, so enjoy the show and enjoy our show with 8-time World Heavyweight Champion Harley Race. It's going to be a great episode. We got some WrestleMania discussion after the interview and a lot more to come. We're going to announce a really, really cool guest for next week, Scum. I'm going to leave that up to you after our interview with Harley Race. You got anything to add before we go over there?
Yeah, Steve, just touch on real quick the great stuff that went on this past weekend. It was nice to, I always say it on the show, but it was nice to actually in person be alongside you for the weekend. And we got to soak in a pretty cool event. The NCWA up here, based out of Clayton, North Carolina, ran their biggest show of the year, the Ivan Koloff Tag Team Tournament. You know, we got to meet a few of the competitors and, you know, soak in all the action and what was a absolutely fantastic weekend.
Yeah, I agree. It was really, really good to see you. You're a gracious host. Great times to be had. Even got a little lucky this weekend, Scum. Apparently, you were able to call into a radio station and win some tickets to a WWE live event. Tell our listeners exactly how that all went down and tell us the phrase that pays.
Yeah. Ironically enough, for someone who sits here and has the guests on a weekly basis spit out our call numbers, I happened to be sitting at my desk at work and I heard this lady that I work with had a country radio station on. They were giving away free tickets to WWE House Show down at the RBC or the PNC or whatever their call letters are these days down at the arena here in Raleigh. And you had to name the theme music from a WWE performer, and it was the Wyatt family, which I knew. So I called up, first ring, they answered, won a pair of tickets, and again, happened to be one of the few times out of the year that you're visiting. So Friday night we go in. The irony that I spoke of, though, is the guy on the phone says, "Ian, what's the phrase that pays?" And I had no idea what radio station it was. So I'm sitting there, and he says, and I acted like you know, the old, you're breaking up, like I couldn't hear him, and the guy was like, "Yeah, get off it, buddy. It's CDR is the brings it home," or whatever the hell the thing was. I was gonna say, well, this country station is too sweet.
I like pro wrestling.
Yeah.
I am Harley Race.
I'm Harley Race.
This is Harley Race.
Oh, boy. Well, either way, we had a terrific weekend. The Ivan Koloff Memorial Tag Team Tournament, of course, sponsored by NCWA. Really, really good stuff. Of course, the Mid-Atlantic Outlaws come away with a victory and take home the championship for the night, the Ivan Koloff Memorial Tournament. Ivan Koloff was there himself. Hall of Famer Ron Simmons. D'Lo Brown was there. A local favorite, Mr. Number One, George South was in the building. Of course, the place was packed, filled with wrestling fans. Very old school setting. It was really, really fun to watch. And Shane Douglas didn't disappoint. He was the guest of the night as far as I'm concerned, as far as in-ring presence. Ricky Morton was a great night of classic pro wrestling, Scum.
Absolutely. Great show. Like I said, for the competitors that were in the ring, for anyone who was kind of helping out as we were with the event. And first and foremost, the fans there were just great. I mean, right on from the first match. I mean, the independent wrestling up in this area, Clayton, North Carolina, it has that old school mid-Atlantic feel, and it's just a lot of fun. I like it a lot. My hat's off to the Mid-Atlantic Outlaws bringing home the Koloff tournament. Great little program there. Ricky Morton and Shane Douglas worked together. Pretty cool stuff. And, as far as NCWA goes, that's kind of their WrestleMania, heading into this point in the year. So very fitting, that we could take part in that event here locally. Very fitting that it would be coming with WrestleMania Sunday upon us, and very fitting that we would have arguably our most decorated guest of all time tonight.
Last week was a really great weekend of wrestling, and this week is going to be even better. And I think we're going to send it home with Harley Race. You guys are going to enjoy WrestleMania. You might even be listening to this later in the week, but this is the time of the year that wrestling fans really love. WrestleMania, of course, the Raw after usually starts what I guess we could call the new year-long season of Raw. So if you follow the current products, of course, going to see some different stuff tomorrow, and of course all the rumors flying around, but we're here for classic wrestling. And when you think classic wrestling, if Harley Race isn't one of your next thoughts, he's going to come and he's going to kick your ass. So without further ado, let's go to our interview with Harley Race.
Achtung, Achtung! This is Alex Wright.
Hey, I'm Robert Gibson.
And I'm Ricky Morton.
This is Kevin Sullivan.
This is Jim Cornette, wrestling legend and all-around nice guy. And you are listening to Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum. I recommend this program highly, especially if you have nothing better to do.
All right, Scum Nation, we are back. Thanks for listening. WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. It's that time. Every week we have a great guest from the glory days of professional wrestling, and what greater guest could you have than 8-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a legend, WWE Hall of Famer as well. Handsome Harley Race is with us. How's it going tonight, Harley?
Well, it's my pleasure. It's nice to be able to talk to you guys.
Great to hear. Thanks so much again for joining us, Mr. Race. We wanted to do a timeline of your career as we do with all of our guests, so take us back to the beginning. How did you get into the world of professional wrestling? What was it about pro wrestling that interests you? And if you could, take us back to that awful auto accident that you had. Tell us what it was like having to deal with that, coming back and almost not being able to be a pro wrestler.
Well, I saw wrestling on KQ-TV out of St. Joe, Missouri, back when I was like 13, 14 years old, and I told my father, my mother, and my brothers and sisters that that's what I was going to be doing. And at the age of 15, I had lied about my driver's license. I was with Gus Karras in St. Joe, Missouri, and I met Happy Humphrey. And I drove Humphrey around for just over a year. And I was involved in a horrible car wreck right after that, and my I can get ahead of myself a little bit. I got married, and at Christmas of that year, she was killed in a car wreck, and I was out for a long time myself. I wound up with 2 braces and 12 pins in my left forearm and 4 metal screws in my right knee. But I went on with it, and here I am today, retired and doing well.
That's very good to hear. Interesting story. I'm sure not many of the younger fans would realize that happened that early on to you. So following your rehabilitation, you do begin work in the ring, obviously, embarking on your legendary career. You would go to work not too long after them with the Funks out in Amarillo, Texas. We'll certainly be touching on your battles over the years with them as we move along. But next, I wanted to get your thoughts on a partner that you'd first joined forces there in Texas.
lead to a real successful team that you'd have moving along to the AWA, and that would be with Larry the Axe Hennig. Could you give us your memories of first being teamed up with Larry? Recount for us some of those many classic fights that you guys had, not only with Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, Vern Gagne, and the host of partners that he teamed up against yourself and the Axe against.
Well, Larry and myself were a great team. He was the foundation of it. He was the wrestler that wrestled in the ring primarily, and I was the guy that did all the flip-flopping and flying around, and we went on to become World Tag Team Champions, and we were that for a long time. Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher together were one hell of a team, and excuse my expression, they could get in the ring with just about any team and come out on top in it. Larry and I were the exact same way, only we were more of a moving around type team. And overall, Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher against Larry, Pretty Boy Hennig, and Handsome Harley Race was a magic draw throughout most of the United States and well up into Canada. You put two big muscle men like they were in the ring with two guys that could wrestle. We could do just about anything involved in the sport of wrestling. And you put that combination together with something like Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, hell, you've created something that anybody would like to watch.
Some really great names to have been working with in the AWA there, the Crusher and the Bruiser, Vern Gagne, of course, such a legendary territory from the glory days of professional wrestling. Now, Harley, if I'm not mistaken, from the AWA, you head down to the NWA. You work a program, of course, with Dory Funk Jr. We'll talk about Terry Funk in a little bit, but take us through that first title win. There was a little confusion that night. Dory Funk wasn't too pleased to drop the title to another top contender at the time, at Jack Briscoe, so maybe there was a little apprehension, and maybe that he felt the same way towards you during your first title win. So take us through that night. You were instructed to leave Kansas City with the NWA title at all costs, so that must have been a tall order for you. Take us through that night, and of course, tell us a little bit about how it was working with the Funks.
Well, I had been in Amarillo with the Funk family for quite a while, and I say quite a while, for roughly a year. In wrestling back then, if you were in one territory over 3 to 4 months, you were thought of as being there for quite a long time. That's how it was back then. You were moving around a lot. And to be in the ring with any one of the Funks, Dory Sr., Dory Jr., or Terry, was a classic within itself, because they were not only great in the ring, they were great people also. I don't think it was so much with Briscoe as it was the Funk family and who Briscoe was wrestling for at the time. I think there was a little bit of difference in that structure.
Okay, that would make perfect sense. Again, we try to do our homework and have some good questions here for you. So we just wondering on that. We appreciate you recalling that for us. So after winning that title for the first run, you would actually drop the title to Jack Briscoe. You work your way through several different territories, winning countless regional titles on your way back up top, and then you finally do regain the world title from someone who you just said, you're pretty familiar with, Dory's brother, Terry Funk. And you guys would have classic battles over the years. And again, I'd say he's certainly deserving of a question with his own, with all those matches you guys had. So could you give us your thoughts on longtime rival Terry Funk, some of the memories being in the ring with him, thoughts on his great career that would span actually all the way into the 90s and even beyond, when he seemed to just keep reinventing himself as he got older, you know, getting known to several generations of fans, even working through up in ECW in Japan, you know, back with WCW toward the end of their run.
Well, Terry was a classy guy and a very good guy. He was the type of person that if he gave you his word on something, he would die and go to hell before it would change. He was just a type of person that anyone involved in wrestling that knew him knew that if Terry gave you his word on anything, it would be that way. Hell would freeze over. Well, in the ring, you had your hands full from the get-go. He was as good as good got, and if he was anywhere around where he was, you know, like the Amarillo territory, of just throwing that one in, he knew that no matter what happened, he was going to wind up going back to there. And he was not going to be insulted or made to look bad or whatever, adjectives you want to include with it. He was going to be his absolute very best in the Amarillo, what back then we called territories, and he was that. He was as good got.
So many great things to say about the Funks from so many people in the world of professional wrestling. A lot of the guys from, say, West Texas State University got their start through the Funk family. Of course, Ted DiBiase's told us stories like that, along with so many other folks. But we're going to move on from there in your timeline. Let's get into the late 1970s. In 1977, you were able to win the NWA title from Terry Funk. Now, along the way, you swapped that title back and forth between Tommy Wildfire Rich, Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, and over in Japan, the Giant Baba. But along the way, Harley, you did something that was pretty incredible at the time and something that wasn't seen very often, and that was the NWA champion in the ring against the WWF champions, such as Superstar Billy Graham or Bob Backlund. You fight the AWA champion, Nick Bockwinkel. You take on all comers all over the world, establishing yourself as one of the greatest NWA champions of all time. So from there, Harley, take us through some of the memorable events of being NWA champion, and take us through some of your top contenders and some of the people that you've had so many battles with. Now, on this show, we talk a lot about Andre the Giant. So we thought while we had you on the show, we could get specifically a story about you working with Andre, just your thoughts on working with him, and what's it like to be one of the only people ever on record to have body slammed Andre the Giant.
Well, I was, as far as I know, the only person in wrestling, period, that ever body slammed Andre the Giant. And I would not be telling that story if I could not back it up. I actually have a picture of Andre the Giant in a body slam position, and I'm the guy that's got him there. I can't remember exactly where it actually happened, but Andre and myself had the greatest respect for one another of anyone that I know ever involved in wrestling. He was the first real giant in wrestling, and absolutely the best. It was just came up out of nowhere, and next thing I know, I got him up in that slam position, and once I had him there, I paused for a second, and I think to myself, oh my God, I hope somebody's taking a picture of this.
I'll bet it was a great thing they did, too. Now, I wanted to ask you while we had you here, Harley, both of you in your prime, sit down, belly up to the bar, who's drinking more beers in one sitting, Harley Race or Andre the Giant?
Andre won that fight every time.
That's great. Seems to be that's how history would have it. Real quick before we're about halfway, almost to the halfway point where I usually ask for a story here real quick, touching on that run that Steve was just hitting on before we went a little further. I know one of the people when he spoke of that great run from 77 into almost the mid 80s where you had multiple NWA world title runs there. Another opponent that you had a lot of times I was wondering to get your take or your opinion on was Dusty Rhodes. I know a couple times he had taken the title. You guys had some great matches there, and I know he was a frequent opponent of you there. What are some of your memories in the ring with the American Dream?
Well, the American Dream was just that. Here was a guy that was body-wise was a little on the heavy side, and like 90% of the American people are right now. And that's why he was the American Dream. He was one of those guys that could perform. He was absolutely untouchable on that microphone, and he could get in the ring and back quite a bit of it up, and he was just an amazing person for that era and time. Yeah.
Well, again, like you said, one of a real original when it came especially to the microphone and just, some of the stuff way ahead of his time, really, when it came to that stuff. And always so entertaining and just great stuff that you guys had back then. So anyway, Harley, we're about to the halfway point of the interview here. What I do here is I always ask for kind of a lighthearted story. I call it the 3 R's out of all our classic performers we have on. I like to get them to tell a story, maybe, not necessarily from inside the ring, but those 3 R's stand for either one of your favorite ribs, road stories, or riot scenes. If you could recollect a story from the road or from, the locker room or whatever you'd like, either a rib, a riot, or a road story for us.
Well, the road stories are generally the funniest. I was notorious for sneaking up behind the guys out on the highway. When I'd recognize their car, I would, let them get on by, and I would pull out and pull in behind them with the lights off the vehicle and hook bumpers up with them and push them up to about 100 mile an hour, and then hit the brakes and back off of them, and snap the lights on them and go by them. And the next day, every swear word in the history of the English language was used when they saw me the following day.
Any particular target of that one that you remember maybe frequently sneaking up on?
Oh, no, I didn't have any favorites.
No, everyone was fair game, huh? Well, we appreciate you sharing that with us. Again, we always try to get a little humor out of our guests, and no one ever seems to let us down there.
It was humor for me, anyhow. It wasn't a hell of a lot of humor for the fighting with him, but
Sure. So after that great story, move on to another match that would have a little bit of wrestling lore attached to it, as the next great champion to come along on the NWA title scene, Ric Flair, began to emerge, and the two of you were set on a collision course for that first Starrcade in Greensboro in 1983. I've heard interviews with Ric Flair numerous times where he repeatedly says, you made him with that one match, and he just spoke of how grateful he was for you working with him in, that title match and passing it along. I've also heard him speak of that there was some confusion there with that match in Greensboro, that for whatever reason you almost weren't able to make it, whether it was weather or something that was going on there. Either way, could you look back for us to that great build up to the first Starrcade, the Flair for a Gold, and tell us, if you would, what those circumstances were that almost led to you not being there, and then give us your overall thoughts on Flair, who was obviously another opponent that you worked many great matches with over the years, and just your overall opinion of working with Rick.
Well, the thing on me not being there was just all a big rib to start with. I just wanted everyone there to think that I wasn't going to be, because at that point in time, there was a board of directors, and the board had thought it was time to make a rotation with the title, and I just wanted everyone there to believe that, well, maybe I wasn't going to be there.
Gotcha. Did you never tell Rick that? Because the story, he sounded like you were caught in a snowstorm or something.
Yeah. I truthfully, I don't know if I did or not. You could ask him. I'm sure I have at some point in time. I couldn't let that lie still all this many years.
Right. So anyway, on top of that, obviously you worked a lot with Rick. I'm sure that I've heard him speak of the respect that you had for him. I'm sure that was mutual in working with him over the years. What were some of your thoughts working with Ric Flair?
Well, in the ring, Flair and myself were quite a bit alike. He was probably a little bit more talkative than I was. But other than that, Flair could go in the ring with anyone and have a great match. And I could do the same thing. I proved that countless numbers of times throughout the world. But all the guys of that year were very good at what they did in the ring. And, there's a lot of good guys now, but back then, damn near everyone was that good.
Yes, and I think that's one of the main reasons why people still to this day are so drawn to the glory days of professional wrestling performers like yourself, Harley. Now, earlier on, Scum had asked you about the whole Starrcade incident there, and you set the record straight, and there's so many stories out there on the internet about Harley Race. So if I could, I wanted you to set another one straight. And then let's go back to 1984. You're working as one of the heads of the St. Louis territory, and in comes Vince McMahon, a young, brash promoter trying to take over the cable outlets all the way across the country and build the empire now known as the WWE. His champion at the time was Hulk Hogan. So he makes a stop into the St. Louis area, and you confront Hulk Hogan and tell him how you really feel. So take us through that conversation that you had with Hulk Hogan. What was his response to it, and what actually was said during that conversation?
Well, in confronting the Hulkster, the Hulkster was a type of guy that he was being paid to do what he did, and that's how he looked at it. He didn't look at it as if he was, running roughshod over everyone else out there. And I confronted him with all that garbage, and there was no push come to shove or anything. We never ever got in, that far into it. And talent-wise, he was as good as there was out there that year.
Okay, so basically what you did was you gave him a piece of your mind as to what you thought a wrestling champion was, like yourself in the NWA, and you didn't like what Hulk Hogan represented as a champion.
Yes, I was a wrestling style champion, and the Hulkster was a talking style. That was the two sides of it.
Very interesting. We appreciate you touching on that with us here. And then a few years after that, you would actually wind up working up there in WWF. For Vince McMahon, you brought in alongside Bobby the Brain Heenan, one of our favorite managers of all time. And then they had the King of the Ring. When you first came in, WWF at the time had kind of a policy that they didn't necessarily bring up the past of their performers that came in, but obviously everybody knew Harley Race was one of the most decorated champions ever. So you won that King of the Ring, and they dubbed you the King of Wrestling. You had a good run with match with Junkyard Dog at the WrestleMania 3 in the Silverdome, some bouts with Hogan actually as well. How did that originally come about for you to go to work for Vince McMahon up in WWF? What were your thoughts of the idea of being the king? And then overall, looking back, what were your thoughts on that run alongside Bobby the Brain in WWF?
Well, when it first come up, I thought the easiest way out of this is for me to just come up with an idea that was so far out in one direction or the other, however you want to call it, that Vince and his group wouldn't go along with it. And I said, I want to be the king. I want to come in and win a big tournament. I want the crown. And that's how it turned out. So with that, how could you not go on and go?
Sure. And that, I mean, you must have had times back and forth over the years with Heenan before that. Did you, obviously, I would think you enjoyed working alongside him. Any recollections working with Bobby up there for those years that he was in your corner?
Bobby was, in his ear and his point in time, was as good on the microphone as any person still to this day has ever been. Just having him in your corner or riding with you in a car and coming up with ideas and different things to say and do, it just doesn't get any better than that.
Oh, yeah, always one of the most quick-witted, funny. I mean, I remember even watching when he would be broadcasting or in an interview, some of the funniest stuff ever. I mean, he was great. No arguments there. And what about the huge crowd there, the event? You'd been through a lot of eras of wrestling. I mean, the Pontiac Silverdome with you and the JYD. What were your thoughts looking out at that huge gate there in Michigan?
Well, it was the largest house in the history of wrestling, and I still think it is to this day. I don't think it's ever been outdone. It was in the middle, 90,000 people, and it was just put together perfectly for that point in time.
Yeah, and of course, Junkyard Dog, Harley Race, a great match on that card. Being a part of such great events like WrestleMania 3, of course, Starrcade 83 was a crazy time, an incredible career for the legend Harley Race. Now, of course, after your WWF time, you still had a little bit more in the gas tank, worked all the way around the world, Puerto Rico, AWA, NWA again. But there was a time where Harley Race transitioned from an in-ring career as a performer to a manager. You had some great runs alongside guys like Big Van Vader and, of course, Lex Luger. So tell us what it was like taking that transition from being an in-ring performer to a manager, and did you use any stylings or any sort of characteristics you picked up along the way from guys like Bobby Heenan or the Grand Wizard, managers like that?
Well, once you have been as high up in wrestling as I had been, you just can't visualize how hard it is to walk away from something like that. And to say to yourself, this part of my life is over. And to this day, I keep it to where it's not totally over. That's why I run World League Wrestling, and that's why some of the talent that's with Vince now, like the CM Punks and different people like that, have been right here with me, and they've made the move on up to there and continue on. And I still have my school going to this day for that reason. I'm not ready to turn over and die and say wrestling is totally out of my life. It's never going to be.
Certainly, Harley. Now, did you take any stylings or anything from any managers you work with along the way, or any managers that you thought were really good in the industry?
No, not really. I had been as high or higher than anyone, I think, even still today, anyone that's been, and it sounds like I'm blowing smoke, where, but I had done everything that's feasibly possible to do in wrestling. And to be able to take another guy like Vader, Luger, or whoever and move them up to that very top position, it just continued the Harley Race version of wrestling. It kept it alive. and it kept me alive.
Sure. I just have another couple questions here. Then Steve's going to finish off with a little segment that he does at the end. If I could, real quick, first, thank you so much for being here with us this week on WGD Weekly. And if I know I speak for Steve when I say I don't think you're blowing any smoke anywhere, and I don't think any of our listeners are going to argue. Harley Race has certainly been as high as anyone ever in wrestling. And again, we were thrilled to have you on, and I know our listeners are thrilled to listen. I am not arguing one bit with that. Not even in the least. That's right. For certainly not in person. That's for sure. Anyway, like I said, it has been unbelievable to have you on. As you can tell, we do like to touch on some different stories that we've seen in doing our homework. And before I hit you with the last question, one other that I wanted to see. Now, anyone who's familiar with you and your career, synonymous with the city of Kansas City, that area, Kansas City, St. Louis up there. And even after your active career ended, you were involved in a variety of ways with the companies, WWE, whoever, that at several times in your retirement, when they've pulled through that great wrestling town, or WCW several times as well. Wanted to ask you some comments that I saw a while back on a documentary. It was a documentary, and I don't quite remember the name of it. It was about the late Owen Hart. And it was noted that you were working in some capacity backstage the night of that tragic incident involving him, that you had a conversation there prior to that with Owen. If you don't mind, would you recall the capacity you were working for the company there that night, and that conversation that you had with Owen prior to that incident?
Just virtually my, and who the God knew would be the last one, conversation with Owen was, it always involved talking about him, his father, and what they did up there in the Winnipeg area, and me coming in and out of there. The Hart family is as good a family as there ever was on the face of the earth, and they've got a lot of kids that were involved in the wrestling part of it, and it's just horrible shame when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was, just remembering seeing on that documentary, from what I recall, it was expressed that he was somewhat uncomfortable. I mean, granted, his roots in wrestling and that family, just how classic and how good of actual technicians they were in the ring. Did he mention to you at all that being uncomfortable with that stunt that they were pulling that night?
No, he didn't. And that was the amazing part of it. It could have been me. It could have been anyone else. No one knows when the man up above wants to call your name.
Right. Absolutely. Agreed. I just recalling that documentary when we were speaking with you. I just thought I would bring that up, and I knew you had worked with the Hart family in years gone by, and I know there's been a lot of respect expressed your way there. I've seen Bret Hart's one of my favorite performers of all time. I know he's always had mentioned him and so much respect for you and things like that. So to move on to a more to a different note, completely different note, kind of honoring your legacy with WWE and your entire career, I wanted to talk about your thoughts on finally being honored first by the WWE Hall of Fame when you were inducted, and then a few years later, in the not too distant past, in another ceremony for the Hall of Fame, they inducted the Four Horsemen, and if I believe Ric Flair and Arn Anderson called out Harley Race and Dusty Rhodes as honorary horsemen. Just wanted to get your thoughts first on being honored in that ceremony when you went in. That was a great class, a lot of legends. I remember the year that you had been inducted and what that meant to you, looking back at your career, and then also what you thought about the Horsemen giving you that nod and the props that you so richly deserve.
Well, it just goes back to what I've been saying all the way through this. if you are the type of guy that puts what you do for a living above your thoughts of wanting to be a jerk or whatever you want to call someone like that, my whole thing in all years I wrestled was to entertain the people that had paid to see it and be in my own mind and the way that my body would allow me to do, to be as good as I could be at doing that. And that's what I tried to do my whole career.
Well, I think millions of fans around the world would agree with me when I say you did a very, very good job, and still tons of fans out there for Harley Race, one of the greatest NWA champions of all time, if not the greatest champion of all time. Now, Harley, while we got you here, I had one more question before we get to our name association. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Now, looking around the landscape of professional wrestling, if you have a keen eye, you'll see a lot of guys out there with Harley Race moves. Tonight included here at WrestleMania, of course, tonight being WrestleMania 30, Triple H with that crisp knee drop that we all know came from Harley Race. So tell us what you think about performers nowadays using moves from Harley Race's moveset, and did Harley Race find any inspiration from some old-timers that we don't know about? If you could fill us in on where you got your moveset from, how you came up with it, and what you think of some other performers using your moves.
Well, my moveset, as far back as you want to go, there was people back then that did other things in the ring other than wrestle. I combined, and I tried to do it at the best of my ability, as good a wrestling as anyone who's ever been in there could do, along with some of the most unmistakable different types of things that has, this got you people still calling me to this day talking about them. And I was one of the very fortunate people that was able to put all that together and make it look halfway right.
Well, after watching all those legendary Harley Race pile drivers, I think you got it more than half right, my friend. Certainly legions of fans out there would agree with me. Well, we're going to move back on to name association now and a lighthearted look at some of the great guys that you worked with over the years. Now, there's one guy, of course, that we always talk about on our show, and that's Andre the Giant. We mentioned him a little while ago, but there's another guy, certainly right from the glory days of professional wrestling, that I'm sure you had some interaction with. So let's start off our name association with one of our favorites, Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch.
Dick Murdoch. You called it exactly right, Captain Redneck. Murdoch was extremely good, and he was not only good in ring, he was a good kid.
Oh, man, that is great. Let's talk about another guy that you took to the top of the card in WCW, Big Van Vader.
Vader, for his size, at the time he was involved in wrestling, could do as much or more than anyone's been there since that was that big.
Oh, I totally agree. It was amazing to see a guy of that stature, of that magnitude, get on the top rope and perform a moonsault on a nightly basis like that. Incredible stuff. Now let's talk about another guy that really, really did a great job in the ring as a heel. Never really needed a title to get himself over with a crowd. Football history at West Texas State. Let's talk about Ted DiBiase.
Ted followed in the footsteps of his father. His father was a very good amateur and was also a very good guy in the wrestling as we know it. And Ted always tried to live up where he thought his father would okay what he did, and to me, he went above and beyond where his father was at.
One of the all-time great heels, Ted DiBiase. Let's talk about another guy that was one of the all-time greats and a favorite of mine. I named my dog after him, Bruiser Brody.
Brody was, for the year and time that he was in wrestling, he was probably 20 years ahead of his time with all of his BS talk and whatever you want to call it. Just that. He was a guy that was in there ahead of his time.
Bruiser Brody certainly missed. Well, we're at the end of our interview, Harley. We got one more here for you. We wanted to just say thanks once again for joining us at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. One more guy here in our name association. Let's talk about Vince McMahon.
Vince McMahon, overall, I knew his father very well, and I liked him. And there isn't a hell of a lot that anyone can honestly say that they don't like or shouldn't like about Vince McMahon right now. He has moved on with wrestling. He has done things with wrestling as far as charitable stuff is concerned. If wrestling ever had to go as it did to a one-man type ball game, it's kind of hard to pick a better one. And truthfully, I don't need or don't have to say what I just said. I said it because I believe it.
Sure. And again, coming from yourself, that means an awful lot. I mean, like we've been saying the whole time, anyone listening in here, with the time that you've spent in the business, and like you said, still to the day with your own company are involved. Again, you don't need to answer to anybody. That is for sure, and never have. And Harley, that wraps up this week's edition of WGD Weekly. We really wanted to thank you. We really appreciate it. It's been a huge thrill for us to have on 8-time world heavyweight champion. And as he said, which again, no arguments from Steve or the Scum, the greatest of all time this week on WGD Weekly. Again, we just want to thank you for being here and wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. And I believe you have a couple of boys in the wrestling game now, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 different ones in there. I'm not going to sit here and mention, a bunch of names, but that's what I truly love to do, is anything that involves wrestling. And as long as I can keep myself together and keep being able to put young guys out in the wrestling business, that's what I'm going to continue to do, because I've been a person that has been extremely fortunate to be able to do what they absolutely love to do their entire lifetime. And I'm not ready to quit just yet.
Well, we're happy to hear that. And who better for someone to learn from, who better to take it in from than an 8-time world champion. And like we said, we cannot thank you enough for being here this week, Harley. That about wraps things up here. We just wanted to say, how much we appreciate it, how much we respect you, everything that you've accomplished, and it's great to hear that you're still at it.
I appreciate that, guys, very, very much, and anytime you'd like to give me a jingle and have me back on, feel free to call.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll take you up on that. You have a great night tonight, Harley.
Definitely. Harley, thanks so much for being on our show. We really appreciate it. Have a terrific night.
You too, guys. And again, thank you.
Well, there you have it, Steve. Man does not disappoint, and right out of the mouth of the legendary Harley Race, like we said before the interview, pleasure to welcome the greatest wrestler of all time, and I'm not disputing it on the air with him, in person.
Nope.
in any way, shape, or form, just like you informed him on there. I mean, I could see if I was to argue that through the phone, all of a sudden the next thing I see is that big tattoo on his forearm coming through my receiver and catching me under the jaw.
That's right. Harley Race, not a man to be trifled with, and not a guy that I would particularly want driving my car or being anywhere on the highway near him. No,
apparently not. And another thing is, don't necessarily know that I would want to be on the receiving end of any of Harley's ribs, as I've heard that several interviews with Ric Flair where he talks about that Starrcade incident, and I don't think anyone ever clued the Nature Boy in that Harley was just kidding, because he has been very, very over the top in saying that he owes a great debt of gratitude to Harley for showing up there, and that there were different circumstances. So maybe Harley ought to get on the horn with his old rival there, the Nature Boy, and let him know he was only kidding. Starrcade 83. It's only been, about 30-something years?
Yeah, I guess it's about time to give up that it's a rib, because like we've said before, it's only a rib when you let somebody else in on the joke. But when moving on from there, well, it really was a fantastic interview with Harley Race, and we really wanted to thank him for joining us. He was a really great guest, and to us anyway over the phone, really nice guy. It's WrestleMania weekend, Scum. Lots going on. We're going to do Steve and the Scum's top 5 WrestleMania moments of all time in just a few minutes. But, Scum, I wanted to go back to that weekend that we had up there at Clayton Fitness at the wrestling event. Ron Simmons, one of our guests, WWE Hall of Famer, he's a really nice guy, and he was there. We had a chance to speak with him. But I caught him. We were talking about ribs, and this is what brought it up. We were in the hallway right before the event, and a fan had come up to him, asked him for an autograph, and he was gracious. He had a box of 8x10, so he pulled out an 8x10 and was signing it for him, and the guy was like, I'm old school. And Ron Simmons kind of looked at him, because the guy's like, I don't know, 25, 26 years old. He's like, yeah, I'm old school. And Ron Simmons looks up and was damn near laughed in his face, but was like, polite about it and didn't. He's like, oh, I know, so am I. And he looks at me, kind of gives me a wink. So I'm smiling. I kind of start paying attention to what's going on over there. So this guy continues with, oh, yeah, I remember the Nation. And he talks about Owen, of course, and D'Lo Brown and the Godfather. And he's like, yeah, whatever happened to Farouk? I don't know where Farouk is anymore. Ron Simmons standing there. So he looks at me, and I look at him, and he gives me that look like, do not spill. Don't ruin this for me. So I don't say anything. I stifle myself. This other kid walks up and does it. He's like, well, you idiot, that's Farouk. Oh, and he was so bent out of shape that he couldn't have ran with that rib. He's like, I was going to run with that all night. And so anyway, we got a chance to get a hold of it, Scum. I told you about it, and it was on from there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even when he was leaving the building about 3-4 times throughout the night, walking by and talking with Ron, he each time, regardless of the conversation, he actually got me with it once or twice, too. So he was a good sport about the whole thing. But each time I'd be like, man, I just see my buddy, and I think he assumed I was talking about you, Steve, because we were there, we had shown up there together and introduced ourselves and stuff, and he'd kind of look around, and I'd be like, no, I'm looking for that fucking Farouk, and oh man, not again with that,
we had to go and chase a couple of the guys down, because at intermission, of course, some of the legends that were there taking an opportunity to sign some autographs for the fans, and the promoter actually pulled me aside and was like, hey, go get Ron Simmons for me. I can't get away right now. Go get him for me and let him know that we have to have everybody in the backstage in a couple of minutes. So no problem. So I head over there, and he's signing some autographs, and I kind of excused myself to him, and I'm like, Ron, excuse me, but a promoter wants you in about 3 or 4 minutes. I know you're kind of busy here. He said, come on back when you got a second, and if you see that bum Farouk, take him with you. He looked up at me and started laughing again. So yeah, it was a running rib all night with Ron Simmons. So that was kind of cool. Alongside, like we talked about already, a really great night of wrestling. And what was really great part of that night, Scum, was having an opportunity to talk with Ivan Koloff. We had ran into him earlier in the day over lunch, and he was joking about having his barbed wire and his chains out in his car. He is such a really friendly and outgoing guy that you and I had an opportunity right before the show to sit down and talk with him and see what it meant to him to be honored like that, the Memorial Tag Team Tournament.
Absolutely. And it was really cool, to get a few minutes backstage. I think when you went to get Ron/Farouk, I think when you got him for the promoter, I believe he wanted to have a meeting with the people, and he also asked us to pull Ivan out of there, because they were, planning on honoring him that night, given that it was the 6th year of the Ivan Koloff Tag Team Tournament, and every year the legends show up and they pay their respects to, again, you and I have both said numerous times on the show, a man who deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, arguably the biggest surprise title win in the history of the World Wrestling Federation, WWE as it's known now, when he ended San Martino's reign up in Madison Square Garden. And, so he was a trailblazer in the business, and these people all have been influenced by him in some way, and they come at the end of the show, really cool. They all get in the ring and say a nice piece to him. They also address Thunderbolt Patterson, who was there, another trailblazer, to use that term again. And so we had a chance when we got Ivan unknowingly out of what they were planning to actually get a few words out of him and what it means to him to be honored each year. He's a big name all over the place, but in the Carolinas, he's certainly a legend, and he lives in this area. So pretty cool to actually have a second. Steve flagged him down. The Scum, dropped a question or two on him, and coming at you right now are those comments from the legendary Russian Bear, Ivan Koloff.
All right, folks, here we are at the Ivan Koloff Memorial Tag Team Tournament with none other than the host of the night, the special guest of the night, Ivan Koloff. I'm going to turn it over to the Scum now, and he's got a couple questions for Ivan.
What an honor to be here with the guest of honor tonight. Ivan, just wanted to get a few thoughts. The 6th year here, all the legends, Ron Simmons, Shane Douglas, we got George South, D'Lo Brown, Ricky Morton in here, and of course yourself, Thunderbolt Patterson. What does it mean to you every year to come out here to Clayton, work this show, and all the fans that always flock, biggest show that they have all year? What does that mean to you personally?
Very humbling. It's an honor, to say the least, because, I've enjoyed wrestling since I was 8 years old, and I've just done my 52nd year in the business, and I just elated to even have privilege of coming down to shows like this, but having it named the Ivan Koloff Tag Team Tournament. I know I've wrestled many tag teams before and won many belts, but that was always because I had a big tag team partner. But I'm honored, very honored to be down here with the promotion. And I just one little message on top of everything else. This Lewis Moore, he's got to keep his insults down about the promoter, because we're personal friends with the promotion, and I don't like him going around bad-mouthing the promoter. So if you could get that message to him, I haven't been able to get a chance to talk to him tonight because he's running around here. I think he's probably afraid of his opponents tonight. But in any case, what a pleasure it is. When I look at it, the card, and having guests like Ron Simmons, Thunderbolt Patterson, Shane Douglas, and all these guys here, that great George South and Ricky Morton, I could go on and on. This is what you'd look back at 50 years ago or 30 years ago and say, this would be a Madison Square Garden sellout, card type thing. And that's the way I look at it. Whenever I know these guys and their capabilities as wrestlers, to actually be part of this now, just have it named after me, and that it is a great honor. And to have a sellout on top of it, and the threatening rain and storm and tornadoes and everything out there, it goes to show you that the fans still love wrestling, and they're it's the nucleus that runs this whole thing, that the reason why wrestling is so popular, and people today watch what they're doing on the big screen type of thing, but they compare it to the old days. And I always go back to saying, man, I love going to the shows, whenever, like you guys used to wrestle years ago, and every time I get a chance, I tell them, you make sure you come down to the local shows here, see NCWA Tag Team Tournament, especially the 6th one here that I'm honored with. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And God bless you all.
Well, very deserving. And one last thing I wanted to add, I think you sell yourself a little short when you talk about how big those tag team partners are. But being that we're here, we going to see a chain or some of that barbed wire broke out by yourself tonight?
Right? I think probably the biggest weapon I got tonight is my cane. Yeah.
It's lethal, too.
I've been known to use it, too. You know, and like I tell my wife, and it's not just to fight the girls off. It's sometimes if I shoot my mouth off too much and somebody challenges me, that's when I usually duck out the back door, you know. But no.
Very good. Well, I'll tell you what, 51 years in the business, I think I speak for Steve. I wouldn't test you.
That's right.
Well, I had a chance, you know, to go out on the yacht today, but when I heard that they're having this here in my honor, I was no choosing. I know right away that I had to come here.
Sure. Well, thanks for taking a few minutes. Honored to talk to you tonight. Very well deserved.
Thank you so much, Governor. You are good, yes. How about that comrade Putin?
And there you have it, folks. Straight from the Russian bear himself, Ivan Koloff. One hell of a guy and very well respected in that community, as he should be. And Thunderbolt Patterson, Scum, we talked about him. You know, he was a little bit before my time, and I have seen some clips of him on YouTube, but having listened to him cut a promo in person, I can completely see where Dusty Rhodes and you had mentioned prior in conversation, Billy Graham, superstar Billy Graham, really similar in their promo skills.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And getting back to the end of that Koloff piece that we just laid on you when we talked to him, who were those fellas he was talking at the end there? Putin? Was he in the house up in Clayton this weekend?
I don't know. I think he's the commissioner.
Or did we run into him down at Zaxby's?
Yeah. He's either the commissioner of the wrestling company or we ran into him at Zaxby's. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. One or the other. Either way, though, hats off to the NCWA for a great event, for the fans, for the wrestlers, for the great young talent that's working with that organization. Hats off to our buddy Lewis Moore, who along with his partner Matt Houston, the Mid-Atlantic Outlaws, won the Ivan Koloff Tag Team Tournament. Great little program there between Shane Douglas and Ricky Morton on the card. All in all, a great night, a great experience, and if you're in the Clayton, North Carolina area, you don't want to miss NCWA. It's some great action. Like I said, a throwback to the days in the Carolinas of the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, NWA, all that great stuff that you like. They're just an organization that does it right.
Absolutely, Scum. Couldn't have said it better. And you know, but I wanted to add this in before we move on to our WrestleMania moments. We met a couple of young men there that have been touring around the country that made themselves a movie starring quite a few wrestlers that you guys know out there from the glory days of pro wrestling. Rowdy Roddy Piper stars in this movie. Of course, Shane Douglas. Scum, there's a couple other guys. Maybe you can help me out with the cast, but the title of the movie is called Zombies versus Pro Wrestlers. Look it up. Check it out. These guys work their tails off. They've been all over the country promoting this thing. So we want to help them out. If you want to listen to some, or you want to watch some independent movies, if you're a horror movie buff, check out Zombies versus Pro Wrestlers. You can find it on Facebook. They're going to be at WrestleMania weekend down in New Orleans peddling their wares. So support those guys. Check that movie out if you can. Look up listings in theaters near you.
Yeah, a couple of those other names in that flick, Steve. You mentioned Roddy Piper and the franchise. Kurt Angle's in it. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Matt Hardy. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other people, but those are the ones that are jumping off the page to me right now as I'm thinking about it. But again, right there, you know, there's some names that y'all love and you've all seen throughout the glory days of pro wrestling. And we met them, some nice guys there. Like Steve said, working their tail off to get the word out about the movie. So if you get a chance, go on out and check it. Most of the events where they're showing the movie, some of the guys are there to meet, talk about it, you know, sign some autographs and stuff. So all around a great production, and can't wait to actually view it myself. And you know, I'm sure we'll have a chance to check it out here in the near future. So Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, be sure and check that out. And Steve, if we can move along, it's a big day here. As I like to call it, the biggest Sunday in sports. Hell with the entertainment. Bigger than the Super Bowl. Bigger than the World Series. To hell with the Stanley Cup.
Football is fake.
I think you could lead us in more properly to what today's big event is than anyone else that I know.
I would have to offer you all a friendly greeting by saying, welcome, everyone, to WrestleMania! There you go, Scum.
Thank you very much. Now, the only thing we're missing here is that maybe one week we can get the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, to sing America the Beautiful.
I'll tell you what, nobody did it like her, except for maybe Ray Charles. She did a great job, too. Let's go on record here, Scum. We talk a lot of talk about this is one of my favorite guys of all time. This is one of my favorite things of all time. And I'm telling you what, guys out there, we've been watching wrestling for a long time. And you can ask me my top 5 favorite wrestlers of all time today. And you can ask me tomorrow. And one of them might change, maybe 2. But, from day to day, things change from year to year. But when we're talking WrestleMania, there's going to be some moments that stand out forever to us. So we devised Steve and the Scum's top 5 WrestleMania moments. Scum, I'm going to give you the honors. Why don't you go first with your number 5 WrestleMania moment?
All right, I'd love to do that, Steve. My number 5 moment is one that's more for, I believe it's iconic status, I would say. But as a kid, when WrestleMania first came, you're familiar with this venue. Remember being out at Laker Hall in our hometown, absolutely. And it was on the closed circuit there. And again, my first memory of WrestleMania was number 1 from Madison Square Garden, and I would have to say that image that you can't go to WrestleMania season without seeing, Mr. T's got Piper up on his shoulders and the airplane spin. Just the mainstream value that T coming in there brought to WrestleMania and the wrestling product, along with Cyndi Lauper and Muhammad Ali and all the celebrities that were there, Liberace and Billy Martin and everyone involved. I would have to say WrestleMania 1, and specifically, even though it wasn't your conventional world title match, it wasn't your conventional ending, didn't even have the big boot in the leg drop after the big Hulk up finish. But I would say Mr. T and Hulk Hogan versus Rowdy Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff would be my number 5 moment, if for no other reason for the historical significance of it, Steve.
That seems to make perfect sense. And when we're on a podcast talking about the glory days of pro wrestling, it doesn't get better than that when it comes to classic WrestleMania matches. I went with something a few years down the road. I went with a match from WrestleMania 12 because it was so entertaining and just incredible. And it kind of was the whisper. There was whispers of attitude in hardcore. And you get into this match, WrestleMania 12, Hollywood Backlot Brawl. Rowdy Roddy Piper again now versus Goldust. That was an incredible match. Rowdy Piper gets hit by a car. Of course, the classic Bronco chase down the highway a la O.J. Simpson. So that was entertaining. And that match was brutal. And it kind of showed, if you didn't know really how to take Goldust as a character, at least legitimized him as one bad dude that can keep up with one of wrestling's classic bad guys.
Sure, Steve, that was a great match, and that Bronco chase was great. It reminds me, I think I told you the other day when we were down at that WWE event, I was standing next to some savage in line waiting to get a soda, and he had a 32 Buffalo Bills Juice Simpson jersey on.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm surprised that I don't have one already in my closet after seeing that. But anyway, getting back to WrestleMania moments, they may have had the fridge and they may have had Bill Fralick and those guys, but I don't think they ever invited OJ to WrestleMania.
Nope.
Anyhow, I did not even mean to lead into this next moment with a O.J. Simpson reference, because it's certainly in horrific taste if that was what I was going for. But my number 4 moment would be also from Madison Square Garden. And it would be one of my favorites of all time throughout the mid-90s to the late 90s, finally getting his just due. And again, everything aside, I don't agree with what happened. I don't agree with how his life ended. But Shawn Michaels versus Triple H, with Chris Benoit going over and finally being recognized as world champion at WrestleMania 20, would be my number 4 moment, just for what a fan I was of his work and how deserving I thought Chris Benoit was. Madison Square Garden reminded me of the 10th anniversary show when they kind of gave Bret Hart, another of my all-time favorites, his moment. Benoit and Hart kind of similar in that they worked their way up, smaller guys, a lot of technical skill, my kind of wrestlers. And so the Benoit moment, and give a footnote to the Bret moment at 10 as well, but those would be my number 4. Chris Benoit and Bret Hart getting their just due in their moment at WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Good WrestleMania overall. Of course, anything out of the Garden is going to be great. The crowd's always raucous. My number 4 moment was an ironically that these two men built the empire that is known as WrestleMania and tore each other's faces off in this match. And I thought it was unbelievable match, brutal as all can be. And the irony of it is those two guys did business for so long and they never really had any sort of an angle because it was long before anybody was, privy to know that Vince McMahon actually ran the company. He was just the announcer guy. WrestleMania 19, Hogan, Vince. Great freaking match. My number 4 WrestleMania match of all time.
Great pick. Love that match. I mean, we're both, anyone who listens to the show understands that we're both huge fans of the Mr. McMahon character, the evil boss and Vince McMahon as a whole for everything he's done for wrestling. And say what you want about Hulk Hogan. He was dead in the water. He couldn't wrestle a match in 1998. Get him off TV, creative control. Somehow he popped back and stole the show 2 years in a row at WrestleMania in the dying days of his career. So say whatever you like. That McMahon Hogan match, great pick, Steve. Great pick. Moving along to number 3, my number 3, I'm going to stay in the same guise of my footnote from last one, and it's kind of a personal one, but I don't think anyone could really argue with this match. And it's WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Just the overall, as I like to say, theater of that match. The twists and turns that it took, the crowd buying into taking the bait, so to speak. Austin turned into the good guy, Bret turning to the bad guy. Austin wouldn't give up that classic shot with the blood pouring out of his forehead with Shamrock asking him and Bret leaning back on that sharpshooter where he never gives up, but he passes out and the match gets stopped. Just to me, again, anyone who listens to the program would know I'm a Bret Hart guy. Thought it was a marquee moment for him, and also the significance that even though he was gaining that popularity and kind of gaining the steam moving down the tracks, I think that was really the moment to me that Stone Cold Steve Austin kind of arrived. He could go with Bret. Yeah, he didn't win, but he could go with him. And, I just think that was a great WrestleMania moment all around.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. We talked about this before. Things that you see when you close your eyes and someone says WrestleMania and a crimson mask, Steve Austin, unwilling to submit to Bret Hart's sharpshooter, is certainly on the list of images I see in my mind when I'm talking about WrestleMania. So one great pick there. I'm going to go for number 3, I'm going to go with WrestleMania 3. On the overall, WrestleMania 3 was one of the most amazing WrestleManias of all time. And here's a couple reasons why. First and foremost, and you mentioned this, all the matches on that card culminated from months to, if not year-long feuds. So it was a very good pay-per-view and very good wrestling event in the sense that there was closure and you could see your favorite villains and heroes, finally beat their longtime rivals. So that was really, really cool. Number 2 on the list, and like you've been talking about, just those iconic moments. Hogan Andre. Who couldn't forget that classic battle? Everything leading up to it. The fact that you thought you'd maybe never see Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan in that context. If you'd been watching wrestling for years, that they really were always good guys. They never really did anything but team against each other. And then finally Heenan comes out there with Jesse and on Piper's Pit, and Andre rips off Hogan's necklace and the feud builds from there. It was fantastic stuff. And then of course, finally, and huge fan of both guys, but my number 3 moment, I guess, would be Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat. Altogether, WrestleMania 3, one of the best WrestleManias ever, if not my favorite, definitely my second favorite WrestleMania of all time. Great stuff on there. But Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, I think there's like 22 false finishes. There's so many stories and legends out there of how that match came to be, how well they rehearsed it, how Ricky had things to say, and how Randy was a little bit more dominant about what he wanted to do in the match. Just overall, one of the best performances of all time. And of course, Ricky Steamboat wins the Intercontinental title.
Sure. And nobody's going to argue with that. I think many people would have that at the top of their list. A classic match. To hell with WrestleMania, maybe one of the greatest matches of all time, that Steamboat Savage. So again, we each got to pick our own here, and you haven't laid one on me yet that I don't agree with, Bud. But with number 2, I'm also going to go to WrestleMania 3, but I'm going to go with this moment as being a kid, as watching the build-up that you just spoke about, the Piper's Pit and the cross getting torn off the neck and Piper leaning over and, hey, you're bleeding, and Hogan was crumpled there and Andre turned on him. I just think, to me, the build-up that led to that enormous crowd, that enormous event. Yeah, you had WrestleMania 1 in the Garden. You had WrestleMania 2 in the 3 locations, arenas. WrestleMania 3, behind Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, was the vehicle that made WrestleMania what it is today, in my opinion. It was the biggest main event ever, at the biggest event ever. At the time, as a kid, I had no idea who would win. I remember thinking, how could somebody possibly beat Andre? But how could Hogan lose? Andre was undefeated for 15 years. Hogan was the champion for 3.5 years and was just running all over everyone, or as he puts it, running wild. It was the height of that era of wrestling, that boom period in the 80s. The biggest it got was, I believe, March 27, or it might have been 29, 1987, Pontiac Silverdome, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, all around. Not saying that it was a better match than the Steamboat Savage one, because it wasn't in the ring. I mean, obviously it wasn't. But just the overall size of that event, that match as a whole, everything involved with it. My number 2 WrestleMania moment is Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, WrestleMania 3.
Awesome. And well put, everything that you said. I mean, the main point the point that you made there, Scum, that I really think is spot on, is that it was the catalyst to make WrestleMania what it is today. 93,000 people. And if you could do it in 1986 or 1987, in 2014, the sky's the limit. And going forward, WrestleMania 30 is going to be one of the biggest of all time. But WrestleMania 3 was set the standard for what you could expect to be a part of at WrestleMania.
Sure. And I believe at the time, with that attendance record, I believe how it was actually introduced to the people was that it was the new indoor attendance record at the time. And I think it still stands. We got to get him on the show sometime, man. Well, I'm going to go with my number 2 WrestleMania moment from the Sky Dome in Toronto, Canada, WrestleMania 6. Kind of like what you said, Scum, when you get invested into a great storyline, you're not quite sure who's going to come out on top. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. Never before were both belts put up against each other, so we were going to see, for the first time, regardless of winner, we were going to see the World Heavyweight Champion, the WWF World Heavyweight Champion, also be the WWF Intercontinental Champion. Never before had that happened. Ultimate Warrior, millions and millions and millions of fans, not to mention Hulkamania. 70,000 people in the Sky Dome going nuts. I could still see that huge sign of a gassed-looking Hulk Hogan with a WrestleMania. Like a bunch of fans brought it was gigantic. Obviously, there's stories of Edge being there and everything. The spectacle, the Bad News Piper match was great on that card, but there was nothing like Hogan versus Warrior. You remember sometimes exactly where you are when things go down. I know exactly where I was, sitting in Bob Griffin's living room with all the guys watching it go down, going crazy. So my number 2 moment of all time, WrestleMania 6, Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior. Steve, again, that exact same thing when I was saying with the Hogan-Andre match. The only other match in WrestleMania history that really sticks out in my head, whether it was in my childhood or even growing as an adult, you always catch WrestleMania no matter what's going on. That Hogan-Warrior match was the same thing. You just didn't know how could the Warrior go down? How could Hogan go down? Who the heck was going to win it? And it just makes for great, and they put on maybe the best match of both of their career. I mean, Hogan has had a million matches that you can rank up there or whatever, but as far as Warrior goes in ring, that is, say what you want, that is a great match, man. And the surprising of kicking out of the leg or missing the leg drop and Warrior hitting him for the win. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. That again, your number 2 could easily be anyone's number 1. I mean, it's just a great match. And speaking of which, Steve, if you could put it before I lay my number 1 on you here, you can go back to the Sky Dome. Who won that Hogan Warrior match anyway?
Who won that match? I'll tell you who won that match. The Ultimate Warrior.
Oh yeah, that's right. At times my memory is just a little bit spotty when it comes here. I need to call on an old friend of mine to remind me here and there. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks, buddy. So anyway, if we can move on to our number one, just being that it hasn't been said by either of us yet, I'm pretty sure that we're going to have a similar take here, but we're going to keep it north of the border for my number one. And this is a personal favorite. And again, to me, this WrestleMania is greatly underrated. It was a time where all of the legendary figures that were still around through the great Monday Night Wars wound up in the same spot at once. The undercard, you had Ric Flair versus The Undertaker. You had Booker T was there against Edge. Rob Van Dam fought for the Intercontinental title. DDP fought for the European title. All the NWO was there, and Scott Hall faced off with Steve Austin, Triple H and Jericho for the world title. But to be there in attendance, and you were sitting right next to me, Steve, and it was the only WrestleMania that I've had the pleasure of going to, and the place was just bonkers. The Rock versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18 would be my favorite moment for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, like I just said, I was able to experience that complete mayhem of that crowd, much like the Bret Austin match that we talked about earlier. The crowd kind of playing the role of deciding who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. But man, when Hogan kicked out and did that shake and the Hulk up that he always does, that place was nuts, insane. And you can vouch for me. It was spine tingling. I mean, it was like nothing. I mean, we've been to a lot of shows. We've been to a lot. They say there's nothing like WrestleMania. As far as the one I went to, there was nothing like WrestleMania. I mean, when Hogan hit the leg drop for the 1, 2, and again, obviously it wasn't until I watched it back on DVD, but one of my favorite JR calls of all time, the 1, 2, he pinned Andre the Giant with that move, and then The Rock kicked out, and then in the end he won, and somehow through it all, a guy who comes in with Hall and Nash as the NWO, and the cancer that's gonna kill my company. And then 2 weeks later, after they take a hammer to the back of the head of the most popular guy, run him over in an ambulance in a semi, he's called back in the ring to do the Hulkster poses with The Rock, and the Hulkamania is reborn. It was just an unbelievable moment in wrestling. And for whatever reason, I don't think 18 gets the just due that it has. And maybe I'm biased because we were there, but my number one moment, Steve, is definitely The Rock versus Hollywood Hogan at WrestleMania 18.
Yeah, and there's no even denying that I'm even going to try to disagree with that. My number one is as well WrestleMania 18, Hogan Rock, for the same reasons. It was unbelievable. It was the first WrestleMania I had ever been to. The size of that place, the amount of people you can fit in there when all you need is a wrestling ring and an aisle to get to it is amazing. I'd been there for baseball games many times. I had never been there for a wrestling event. It was off the hook. WWE, and I'm sure to this day, and even more so now, so many years later, they go all out of their way to make sure their fans have a great experience. Regardless of the seats, it was great. That, above and beyond that match, and like you said earlier, that Ric Flair Undertaker match was great. The pop that Arn Anderson got when he came out with that spine buster, including you and I coming out of our skin, was amazing.
Agreed 100%. When he came in, you're like, who the hell is it? And then the Taker bounce and he hit that spine buster. It's like, that is effing Arn Anderson, baby. Then the place just shot up out of their seats like 65. It was great. And it was if Anderson, I know he was a tag match on Mania 5, but Arn Anderson got a Mania moment that night. Another one of my favorites of all time.
Oh, yeah, and he attests to it, too. He was out there for about 45 seconds, gave that spine buster, and somehow got himself busted open in that match. So, yeah, I miss those days. That was one of the most exciting WrestleMania matches of all time as well. I'd say if I had to be given 10, I'm sure that would make the list. But there's a couple others that would make the list here, too, Scum. I wanted to talk about, you talked about WrestleMania 13, Hart versus Austin. That just barely missed my list. Definitely a great match. How about this match? WrestleMania 22, Mick Foley versus Edge in that hardcore match.
Love it. Love Foley. Fan of Edge's. And again, another one of those guys getting their moment. Love that match. Classic Foley, classic ending. Great wouldn't argue if that was in your top 5 or your top 2 or your number 1. Great match. A couple that I was thinking of, Steve, while we're doing some honorable mention is, again, I know the Hogan match at Mania 3 was a big moment for him, but just due to what he did for everything and how, awesome he was and what a draw he was, and as a kid, like, seeing Andre the Giant on TV. I think his moments at the first 2 WrestleManias, with the body slam match at 1 with John Studd, his longtime rival, and then at 2 with the Battle Royal with all the football players and everything in there. Him getting his hand raised, the king of the Battle Royal, was kind of cool, for Andre to have a few Mania moments in the, after 3, his career kind of winded down. I know he was a part of the next few. He had Jake at 5 and was in the tournament briefly at 4, but it was kind of cool to see, looking back historically, that Andre had a few big moments on the big stage.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's great to see that his name's going to be forever enshrined with WrestleMania, as long as they keep the Battle Royal, for that matter. But, I guess, you could do worse. Wasn't there a WrestleMania at one point that had nothing but tag team matches?
That WrestleMania 2000 to me is, and again, all of them are good, but I don't know how you can have a whole card and not have a singles match on it at WrestleMania. But there's 4-ways and 3-ways and tags and this and that. I mean, you had such a great roster that I just think, I guess out of 30 years, you're allowed one slip up. To me, that slip up was 16. And again, another moment, kind of just, I mentioned Bret earlier, that being that he's my favorite performer of all time, the Piper Bret at Mania 8, which was kind of Bret's singles coming out party. And the first real, obviously the Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels and him is another great moment that I look back at fondly. But that one, the other Battle Royal at WrestleMania 4, where Bret, that was the first time they kind of gave him a singles run, when Bad News won the Battle Royal and Bret, destroyed the trophy afterwards. That was a cool moment again, as someone who was always a fan of the Hart Foundation, and Bret Hart being there at the end, and kind of you're like, whoa, is he going to be a singles guy now? That was a pretty cool moment. Again, at the time, maybe it wasn't obvious that was what was going to happen until he busted the trophy. But I know a couple of guys, I was trying to, when we watched the other night, I think we watched one of those Battle Royals while you were up here.
We watched that one.
Taking advantage of the network, and it was just was drawing a blank here. So I think that also they were a part of that Battle Royal that I spoke of with Andre as well. But we had B. Brian Blair on as our guest here on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. And I can't for the life of me, Steve, maybe you can help me out. Maybe it's just another brain thrust by the Scum. But who was his partner that he hit the ring there in those Battle Royals with?
Well, I'll tell you who he is. He's Jumping Jim Brunzell.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Jim Brunzell, that's who it was. Okay, well, not that he was necessarily a WrestleMania moment for you, but thinking of those Battle Royals, goddamned if I couldn't think of who the hell the other Killer Bee was.
Oh, boy. Yes, Jim Brunzell. Also, his name may come up a little bit later, maybe over Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe we'll talk about him a little bit later on in the year. Jumping Jim Brunzell. But moving on from there, Scum, I had one. You'd mentioned Shawn Michaels, and I had one here on my honorable mentions list for him. The WrestleMania 24, the retirement match, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, obviously the big dramatic ending, and then, of course, the fond farewell the next night on Raw. But I thought that was a really, really good match. Classic Flair. I think at one point in that match, he actually lands the spot where he gets flipped up and over, and then he runs to the other side of the ring and gets up on the top rope only to be slammed. But this time he actually gets a move off the top rope. And Jerry Lawler goes
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that was the first time he ever. Well, for that matter, and again, I guess it would be tough to pick for that. And I was always a fan of his work, and you can't deny how good it was. You can pick probably about 10 matches with Shawn Michaels, and you can't go wrong. Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels ladder match from WrestleMania 10 would certainly be on my list if it was longer. Always a fan of Scott Hall, Razor Ramon. Michaels has had dynamite matches. That McMahon Shawn Michaels match was great. Austin, you name it. I mean, Shawn, pretty much anyone he was in the ring with at WrestleMania turned out to be a great match. That's why he's called himself the showstopper, the main event, the icon. He's called himself Mr. WrestleMania, and no one's really argued with it.
Yeah, got to say that. Not one of my favorite guys of all time, but he pays his dues, and he certainly gives the fans what they want to see, and I know there's a million Shawn Michaels fans out there. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. But, Scum, we're almost out of time, man. It's been one heck of a show. Harley Race, of course, 8-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, was a very gracious guest here at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. So the only one more question to ask before we head out of here, Scum. Who do we have next week?
Well, like we were talking earlier about some of the people we met down at the NCWA event when you were up visiting North Carolina here, Steve. And next week we're going to bring the Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly faithful, Scum Nation. We're going to bring you back to the Attitude Era. Been a while since we've been there. A lot of our guests have been from the Glory Days, the 80s and 70s this season. For the first time in a while, we're going to ask you all to bob your head back and forth a little bit, and maybe if you wouldn't mind recognizing, because next week we're going to have card-carrying member of the Nation of Domination, former multiple-time European champion, Intercontinental champion, and at one point the Euro-Continental champion, D'Lo Brown is going to be here next week on WGD Weekly, Steve.
That's awesome. I can look forward to it. Some stories from the Attitude Era. Look out, folks. It's going to be another great show alongside all of the shows we've already done this season. Many more guests to come. We got a lot of irons in the fire, Scum. Anything else you want to add before we head out of here?
Well, no, like I said with Harley Race, like we say with D'Lo Brown coming on next week, the one thing that you can't deny is I like to say you learn something new here every week on WGD Weekly. And that, my friends, is something that I can guarantee you is that you will learn something new here every week on WGD Weekly. And also, obviously, with all the irons in the fire you speak of, Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly, Steve, the Scum, Harley Race, and all of our friends out there in Scum Nation are still and continue to grow as the latest sensation sweeping the wrestling radio nation, baby.
What more can I say to that? Hope you enjoyed WrestleMania. We'll see you next week with D'Lo Brown.
See you next week, people.